Thank you to our wonderful presenters for joining us today. We're really excited. And let's go ahead and jump into some of the questions before we, of course, open it up to the whole group to ask their questions as well. So question one, and anyone can feel free to jump in. Why do you all think it's important to really start with and highlight the intersections of sexual violence experienced by Black women and femmes while supporting survivors?
I guess I'll go first. I'll be the first speaker. I think that the plight of Black women, Black girls, Black femmes, Black survivors has really been diminished in society. The narrative isn't really about what happens to Black women or women of color. It typically is what happens to more mainstream women. And some of that is because of the stereotype that Black women and girls are resilient and more mature and even a little bit more sexualized, and therefore can't be victimized. And if you can't be victimized, then we're talking about sexual assault and sexual violence, the discussion doesn't center around you. It is almost like Black women and girls are being forgotten in the discussion.
Thank you. Luce?
Sure. I literally, and this is why I'm late, and I apologize and want to send my love to Hibo. And I believe, Millicent, you and I have met before because I know your name before you were Phipps.
Yes, and when you were pregnant in San Francisco.
I was with my 19-year-old who's a freshman in college. So anyway, I think it's critical that we center the voices of Black women. And when I say Black women, I am, of course, talking about Black American women, Black women from Africa, the motherland, Black women from the Caribbean, and Black women from my homelands and Latin America, because we have a legacy of sexual violence, unfortunately, in our DNA, right? That was not of our own choosing, of our own right to free will, to our bodies, to any of that. And I believe that it is through our solidarity, which is why I founded IamNegrx, that we can help to liberate and end child sexual abuse. But it's important for us to go back to the founding of this country and to see how we were viewed as Black people, as Black women, as Black girls, as Black femmes, and how we were made disposable. Just this morning, I was at the Capitol because they're like, it's just a month shy of our session ending, and uplifted African-American woman named Lulu Benson, who was the first Black woman to die in New York State prison. And who, like me, was an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse, incest, and rape. And unlike me, was in prison. And we need to intersect these issues especially when we look at how Black girls are seen in schools. And I know I'm going all over the place, but I'm still feeling Lulu in my presence because we said her name three times, to bring her as an ancestor into the space. But when we view Black girls and Black femmes and Black children as disposable, and we're not paying attention to their trauma, or even applied trauma-informed, whatever, approaches to how our kids are being viewed, then our kids are being seen as criminals and oftentimes ending behind bars or worse, dead. And so I want to bring that into this space, because I think lots of times we talk about those of us who are survivors or crime victims as if we're separate from folks who cause harm. And oftentimes we're not. And I'm going to end there.
Hi, and I will echo what Melis and Luz said. Hi, Luz, and nice to meet you in this platform. And again, so yeah, for us, and we feel like, a lot of victims, many communities silence the victims. They don't talk, and they they're stereotyping. They are they are shut. So we need people, we need advocates, we need people who will speak for them, and not stereotype them, not generalize them, then not to shame them. And there is so many factors that affect sexual assault in the communities, and we will dive into that as we go with the questions. But it's we need advocates of multiracial, multicolor, everywhere, who will be at least be in the forefront for the survivors, and also those survivors, because mostly it takes big deal for survivors to come up and say, I'm a victim of sexual assault. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of hard work to be in the platform. And it's like, good to respect and value their voices more than anybody. And I'll stop and we'll go. Like, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, you all sort of led us very quickly into our next question, or really getting us to think about some historical context, right? Can you discuss more around the historical factors that might impact or have impacted Black women and femmes' experiences with sexual violence?
I can go. So the historical factor, and I will say, everybody, we have, all of us, we have, I think, expertise in some areas. So my historical factor will be for African immigrants and refugee communities. And there are some things being a refugee, being a immigrant, definitely people find themselves in a situation where they were not they have been vulnerable. They have been vulnerable in a situation where moving from your home country to another country, women and girls have been gang raped, object raped, and they have suffered so much traumas that have never been addressed. And coming to a country even welcome in United States, it's we help them resettle, we help them get services, we help them get those, but have we ever even paid attention to the traumas that they have been carrying, being a war victims, being what is the history, what is we see people with mental illness, but what is the cause of this mental illness? Was there a historical trauma that they carry from their past life that has never been addressed?
Thank you. Millicent?
I think that Luz touched a little bit on it when she was talking about the generational history, that if we go back, so we're building on a history of people, here we are in 2022, but we're built on colonialism and slavery and a lot of, racism and everything that has led us to a place where we have historical systemic oppression, where women have been oppressed based on their race and gender in some of the institutions and systems that are central to our country: criminal justice system, educational system, the healthcare system. They're all places where now we see bias and institutionalized gendered racism toward Black women freely practiced. And we're trying to deal with what is happening now, but we also have to look at the history of how it got created, or we can't actually change the situation that we're in now, because we're talking about decades of, I'm sure some people think these systems are benevolent. When you talk about educational system, a lot of people think it's great, but no, there are issues in our systems.
Yeah, this country was founded on the backs of Black women, period. There's no, one of my mentors, Evelyn Laurent, is a Haitian sister. She's a professor out in Cali, and she says there is no corner in this world where Black women have not been sexually violated. And I know that I say that during the hardest month, right, where we're celebrating sexual violence. And I certainly want to share love to any other survivor siblings who are out or not out on this call, and say to please take care of yourself during this discussion. But it's important to speak truth to our lives. It's important, and however you speak that truth, right? Some people do it through art, some people do it through music, through poetry. My art was through policy, right? Thinking about what was it that I needed as a little Black like Puerto Rican girl in Harlem, and why didn't a culturally specific program exist in the 70s and in the 80s, and the like what I consider as an arrogant New Yorker, like the most richest and beautifully diverse area in the world. And so how could we have that, right? So that's where some of the culturally specific came from, at least from my, as it pertains to Loose, because of course it was a concerted effort by many other Black, Asian, Indigenous, and Latina folks. But we cannot talk about sexual violence as if it started within the last 50 years. We have to go back to the founding of this country. And not only were Black women sexually violated, but so were Black men and Black children. And we never, ever talk about that. And we've never, ever received any atonement or any real reparation around that reality, right? And so in 2016, I believe it was, or 2017, Black Women's Blueprint, if you don't know who they are, you might want to check them out. They're based in New York. They held the first ever in the United Nations, a Truth and Reconciliation, to talk about the experiences of the transatlantic slave trade and as it pertains to Black women here in the United States. And of course, that is the Black American experience. But because the US is a colonizer and an oppressor, and we never get to talk about that. And, you know, I'll shout out, this is Loose saying, this is not Ujima saying that, this is Loose, because I don't want to mess with your money. But we've never talked about that. And so, and we've never talked about the colonizing of the Virgin Islands, right? St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. John, as well as Puerto Rico, my homeland of Puerto Rico, and its connection to the exploitation of Black people's bodies. And so if you've never read Dorothy Roberts' book, it's an old book from the 90s, but it really sort of speaks to the killing of Black bodies, and it uplifts this reality of this historical connection of sexual violence. And so I want to just couch that there so that when we're having this conversation, we're not having this conversation as this is something that just happened like in the last 100 years. We're talking about like over 400 years of conditioning where our ancestors were not even allowed to say no, ever, regardless of gender, you all.
Thank you. So that gives us a lot to talk about and a lot to unpack as we continue the conversation. But some pieces that we're picking up on are, you know, fear, distrust of systems, experiencing trauma within systems that were set up to help survivors, maybe not set up to help us in the best way as Black people in the best way, but still, again, set up with the intention of helping survivors. But we know that for many Black survivors, feeling that they won't be believed, or fear or distrust of working with law enforcement or other systems involved folks, systems involved advocates as well, are major barriers to reporting sexual violence. Can you speak to some of the other issues or other barriers or the intersections, I guess, that create that difficulty for Black survivors when reporting?
Do you want me to go? You were calling on us for a second, so I thought you might call again. You mentioned the fear of not being believed, and I think that's paramount. That we don't believe women, we don't believe Black women, we don't believe Black girls, we don't believe Black men and Black boys either. When we don't believe them, so how can there be any type of idea of procedural justice if someone does not believe when they're in the system? I think they're also, if you have a prior negative impact from the criminal or civil justice system, I don't mean through sexual violence, I mean something bad has just happened, or you've seen something happen, or you've seen the police do something negative to yourself, to your family members, to your community, you don't then reach out to that entity that you see as harmful because you've seen something negative happen. And even as we talk about systems, there are actually legal limitations to what criminal justice can do for someone who has been the victim of sexual violence. And people do talk, so then you might understand if the situation is fraught and not so favorable factually to you, maybe you don't want to call the police and talk to a prosecutor and have a jury decide whether or not this violence happened to you, that you know happened to you. Or maybe there isn't a law that actually can be charged. You know, maybe it was your spouse, and in some states, spouses, there is no spousal rape. So therefore, there's nothing that you would be able to do. Things like that are just legal limitations that are barriers for people. And I also think that as Black women, sometimes we bear the burden of the family. So if it's an intimate partner, if it is a family member and you are going to report or get a system involved, you now have opened up your family to be exposed to systems. You've opened up something that some people consider to be shameful. And now you have other people coming into the community and actually looking at what happened to you, what happened in your family, looking at everything from your parenting to your own history with partners. It opens up a lot of things, and those can all be barriers to anyone wanting to report.
Hibo, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing is also what is justice, like, even if they come out and report, are they going to get justice? And what, like, who are there? Like, because victims, mostly we do understand, like, the perpetrators, people rally behind the right perpetrators. They get a good lawyer, they get all this. So they have made all this effort to come up and they say, like, I've been a victim. But again, are they going to get the justice? Are they? And so, and I will also second what Millicent said, like, and a lot of victims feel like it's jungling, like, because the family, for example, it's something that happened within the family, and it's incest. So are you going to send your family member to prison? And the victims is going to be like, questioned, and like, breaking the family and everything, like, so those are the things, like, and then the system being not being, like, being supportive of Black man, how. So there's so many challenges that victims face out there, and make them not report. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to echo everything Millicent and Hibo said. And I also want to add that not only are these institutions, the criminal justice system, the educational system, the housing system, job ready to, the employment economic system based on racism, ableism, heterosexism, right? And all of these forms of oppression, but so is our movement as the crime victims movement. We end up silencing and making Black women and Black survivors invisible. Oftentimes, our stories are not the ones used during the legislative days where you go to the Capitol, unless they're famous Black survivors, right? Like, in order for them to be seen and to be heard and to be given the mic, they got to be like famous, like Gabrielle Union, right? Like somebody big, Oprah. They can't just be the sister from around the way who is a survivor and is open and ready to speak. Like, that's not the palatable victim or survivor. And then media plays a role into what that looks like as well, right? We don't see our stories and our faces around, what it looks like when people are creating stories around survivors. We're often silenced. We don't hear about the Racy Taylors and about, we think Rosa Parks was only a civil rights activist, not knowing that her work was rooted in ending gender-based violence, right? Like this is real talk. Harriet Tubman, same thing there. Like we're not taught this, that you can be both a civil rights person, right, and a Black feminist or someone working on gender-based violence, and then our own movement plays a role in it. Right. And so how do we get our own movements, our own state coalitions, our own national groups to create a platform that says, no, we want all survivors, right? And primarily we want to center the voices and the stories of Black women, right? Because when I, as a survivor, open up and I tell my story, I make it so that other survivors feel comfortable telling their story. I don't take that, I never take that for granted. but our own movement plays a role into what that looks like, and often is asking for us to divide ourselves between our culture and our communities to choose this false sense of what safety looks like. And so an example of that is the rise of Freedom Summer of 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so this conversation about Black Lives Matter, right? Defund the criminal justice system, and then we get to gender-based violence. Well, what are we going to do there? And then and then there's no real talk about, well, what are we really talking about? How do we protect Black women and children? How do we protect Black femmes and Black LGBT folks and Black people with disabilities if we defund the police? And how do we intersect these issues so that they're not seen as separate? We can call for defunding the police. We can call for transformative justice. We can call for approaches that will allow for all survivors to be believed. And I'll end with, even Me Too was even tried to take away from us. Me Too was started by a Black sister. Next thing we know, it was like all of Hollywood trying to take it away. And many of us were like, oh, no, you're not going to do this, right? And so many of us end up going, but it doesn't, and I know it was started by a Black sister, but it didn't really speak to me. Well, that's for us to take on. Like me, Me Too wasn't just Tarana's. She's giving that to the world for us to say, this is our moment to say nosotros también, right? For those of us who speak Spanish or whatever language you speak, right? Around the Black diaspora, because we know because of colonization, we all don't speak English. We speak French, we speak Spanish, we speak Portuguese, we speak Creole, and those are all Black native tongues. Let's not allow ourselves to be separated, and let's claim back, right, these tools that people before us gave us and are fighting for us. But absolutely, those sort of not knowing those historical moments and being conditioned to think that you need the right victim or like the perfect victim. I don't even know what the hell that means half the time. But I remember working at a coalition and thinking about planning for legislative day. And it was like, we always had to get, if it was a person of color, primarily if it was a Black person, you had to go for somebody who was famous. You couldn't just go for, just an everyday sister, which is a huge, huge problem. And we have to sort of push past that. So I'll just end there.
Thank you. Yeah. And so that's getting me thinking more and more about the concept and the language around sanctuary harm and institutional violence. Those terms are relatively new for many, but as you've said, unfortunately, very common and historically based experiences for Black survivors. There's some data that sort of delves into the experience as well. Again, thinking about institutional violence. For example, a study in 2017 by University of Florida reported back that Black women are at the highest risk of any group for experiencing sexual violence perpetrated by a police officer. There are many more data and stats like that, but could you talk us through these concepts, what they mean, and maybe even give us a few examples again of how they show up for survivors? Hibo, would you want to start?
Okay, those the sanctuary and it's a new terminology for me. I don't I can't dive into that. But what I and I was looking into so institutional and places where we find safe place for the people to to thrive and when that place becomes unconducive, being people are being vulnerable, be it in the jail system, be it in the and places of worship and the places of we feel most of our survivors, the places when they are victimized, the first places they're gonna run is gonna be spiritual places. When the spiritual places are not safe enough for people then they become vulnerable and they're being abused there, then we will say that is not something that is it's unacceptable. And yeah, and I will
Yeah,
go
that
with this.
I think I think that was a great place to start us out. Millicent or Luce, would you want to add to that concept?
I think she was talking about like institutional violence. And when I think of institutional violence, I think of the like prison system. You gave the example of the statistics for police, but then like prisons. And then she also said religious institutions where people then prey upon their parishioners or other people who may have come. I mean, obviously in a prison, you don't come voluntarily, but people in prison who have been victims of sexual violence then are preyed upon by prison guards or prison staff. That would be a type of institutional violence. Somebody who is dealing with trauma in their personal life and goes to a pastor and would like to have counseling, and then the pastor sexually abuses them or someone else within the church. That's the type of institutional examples of institutional violence. And I think your other thing you were talking about was sanctuary harm or sanctuary trauma. And that is an example would be someone going to an advocacy agency and then the advocate actually asking harmful or degrading questions or re-traumatizing, or when a prosecutor asks for a survivor to reenact their sexual assault, or you go to protection order court and you want to get a sexual assault protection order and the judge then queries you in depth about what happened to you and your own sexual history. That actually re-traumatizes people. It's outside of what should be happening. And you're going to a place where you think you're going to get help. It could be a sexual assault nurse examiner, someone who maybe has a benevolent purpose, but they actually are doing harm to the person who wants to actually have a place of getting help. And that would be sanctuary trauma or sanctuary harm.
Thank you. And Luce, if you wanted to add anything, I had a specific thought in mind around your thoughts around Black queer survivors' experiences with sanctuary harm in particular.
Sure. Well, I will say that I find myself to be an affirming person who loves my LGBT gender nonconforming community, but I am a heterosexual person. But I think there's a lot of reasons why Black queer folks do not trust the system. And I literally, as you were asking this question, thought about Andrea Rich's work. And if you haven't read Invisible No More, you might want to check that out because it really has some useful tools. And I think it has a workbook to it as well that allows you to take some steps and approaches in your own community, and we're organizing. But the truth of the matter is that especially Black trans and Black gender fluid folks who are stopped or in custody of any type are often sexually violated by police officers themselves. So in other words, and I don't know how far we could go. And again, this is Luce speaking, not Ujima, but we have to also, when we talk about sexual violence, talk about sex work, right? Work as sex, right? And not just from a place of victimization, but also from a place of liberation. And for many Black trans folks and Black queer folks, they're at this intersection of trying to live, because oftentimes we as parents end up kicking our families out because we buy into this mental health thing. And I want to say this because this is like historically, and I love history, but the Combahee River Collective was started by Black women in the US, and that is what gave life to Black feminism as I see it, right? And so folks like Audre Lorde, Barbara Smith, yada, yada, they used to be down with the Black Power movement of the 70s, right? And what the talk is, as I sit at their feet and I listen to their stories, Barbara Smith will say, but much of the Black Power movement was homophobic as hell. Right? In the same way, today, much of the BLM movement that I am also a part of is homophobic and is misogynistic, right? And so we must reckon with those things. I know that someone in the chat was strong enough to share how they were poorly treated in our community by speaking their truth as a survivor. And we have to reckon with this. Even those of us who understand that we need to defund the police, and I know I'm going place, but I'm gonna come back, I promise. So just follow me here.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Right, and so we have this system that says we'll protect you. We're about public how public safety and this idea that we're conditioned that when someone harms us or causes violence to us, that when they go to prison, we will receive justice. And I'm here to tell you, I'm 55 years old. I have experienced sexual violence from the ages of 7 up until I was 15. And I didn't use the criminal justice system, but I am still working on what justice looks like for loose, like the little loose in me. Like that is my work that I have finally 20 years ago said, okay, I get it. I'm not going to wake up one day and not be triggered. I'm not going to wake up one day and be grounded every day. I'm going to have to work for that because that is what that violence caused in my life. But I damn sure know that just using the system of accountability that was rooted in a history of looking for Black people, our ancestors, is not what justice looks like. And so I do want to publicly apologize to those survivors who are in our community who get ostracized for speaking their truth, not being believed. But back to this idea of police sexual violence, we don't talk enough about it. And so I looked up on the stats, and I just want to say these stats to you all. It doesn't tell me, but you got to check out Invisible No More. Literally 59% of Black people, despite being 12% of the population, have experienced police sexual violence. We don't talk about this. We don't ever talk about this. 46% involve fatal violence, not just sexual. 20% involve sexual, 32% involve physical violence. Like, these are staggering numbers, and we never talk about that. And that never gets added into the conversation of Black Lives Matter, right? And so I'm going to end with, there is a new table to the Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives, and it's called Abolishing Patriarchy. And that is literally the charge that we are bringing into that space, which is, one is, okay, brothers, we down with ending white supremacy, but we also have to end patriarchy, right? With the same rigor, right? And that means that we have to unpack some conversations that we've not had. Everyone who raped me and sexually abused me was a family person. These were not strangers. These were people that I knew in my own home, in my own community, right? And so we have to have those real hard conversations around this idea that we got conditioning to think that our bodies were not our own, that even our own people became to believe that. And so I'll end there.
Thank you. So I'm gonna skip a couple questions. I'll come back to them. But I'm really interested, because for me it's going there, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts around the relationship between classism, respectability politics, and sexual violence. Because I know Luce mentioned, Rosa Parks. I know we've mentioned how, survivors have to show up in a certain way in order to really get their stories heard and really to get their stories taken seriously. When it comes to reporting, we're still looking for folks to fit the mold. But what are your thoughts on that? The relationship between classism, respectability politics, and sexual violence? Millicent, I'll have you start.
Okay. I mean, I think Luz touched on it in a couple different points where she was saying how Gabrielle Union, Oprah, there are people who are the acceptable Negro stereotype. And those are the ones that also, if you think about who might have the best chance at some form of justice in our flawed system, it's the perfect victim. The perfect victim is not going to be seen as a sex worker. That sex worker is going to be judged, although sex workers can be raped and assaulted. The classism that comes into it, the economics that come into it, people, how they present themselves, what did you have on at the time it happened? All of those things that systems look at are the intersections of classism and colorism and everything else. And as you weed out what's not acceptable, that leaves very few people at the end who could have a form of justice, because at the end of it, a jury of your not peers for the defendant are looking, and they're judging the person, even though it's supposed to be the defendant who's judged, but is the credibility of the sexual assault victim in court who's going to be judged. So how did the interaction happen? All of it is the person's demeanor. And you know, how you talk, how you portray yourself. If you turn the officer off, if you turn the advocate off, if you turn the prosecutor off or the judge off, all of those points can be a bad outcome to you if you try and access the system. And if you piss any of the system actors off the wrong way, you might find yourself in the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now you are the problem. You lied. You are, you know, contempt because you don't want to testify or you don't want to participate in the system. There are so many things that, I mean, Luz gave the example of who gets to go to legislative day. It can't just be any person. It has to be the one who portrays the image of what the sexual assault or domestic violence victim should be. And a lot of times when we're talking about imaging in the United States, the image is not women of color. That is not the acceptable image. That is not the image that is put out there. That is not the one that will get the attention. Black women's tears are not going to get you the legislative money.
Thank you. Hibo, do you have any thoughts on how you've noticed or seen classism impact refugee survivors?
And in United States, it's completely different than in like home countries. Home countries, like, you know, and class is something that is very much like, you know, people get away with the crimes if they have class, if they are like, you know, and mostly like, you know, and I remember like when we like there is some people who are like, you know, respectful people, like, you know, in politics, who the child might cause, and but they will, everything will be like dealt with and in a manner that is like, you know, under the rug, like, you know, don't go to, we will pay you for this, don't report it, don't. And so it's like, you know, things are not, people don't get, victims don't get justice in the third world, and because of many reasons. And with money, people, you can pay the good lawyer to go and advocate for the person who caused harm, so, and sometimes putting the victims in troubles. And so there is so many factors that leads into this, and corruption is another thing in our home countries that is like, you know. And the other time I remember somebody showing one of our advocates sharing a video where a girl was publicly like sexually molested, and the community wasn't like, you know, responding, like, you know. And that shows us like, you know, how are we taking this, and when this the police were talking, how they like, they didn't value what was happening to the victim, even if it was on recording and they could see it, and they would be like, we're gonna deal with these matters. And so those are like, you know, there's so many barriers that the victims have to break. And in United States, I feel like, you know, people have made a lot of breakthrough, but in the third world, it's not there yet. It's not there. People are not able to wear the clothing that they feel comfortable in wearing, like miniskirts, like, you know, those clothes, they are being publicly sexually molested, and there is no systems that's protecting them. So it's like, you know, those are things like, you know, that are not like, they have, definitely we have to make a lot of hard work, but in American, at least, even we have strong women, like, you know, strong people who are speaking against this. But in the third like, you know, countries, these are not there. So
Luz, did you have any other thoughts? I know I do have a question that I know you probably have some thoughts around if you want me to wait, but if you wanted to add to that.
Well, I think I want to just add that it wasn't until 2003 that the halls of Congress, on the floor of the U.S. Capitol, our lives as women of color was debated in terms of safety, which is what gave life to the culturally specific grant program. And I think that's important for us to know and understand that even within the construct of a mainstream violence against women movement, it wasn't until 2003 that they're arguing whether we need resources in order for people like Hibo, right, and Millicent and Ujima and the API, Asian Pacific Island Institute, and Casa de Esperanza, and all of these other culturally specific organizations to be able to access funding. Like, I just want to couch that right there. What did you want to ask? Oh.
Yeah, so I wanted to know, because you mentioned a friend and mentor of yours is Haitian, and my husband's Haitian, so I am really into sort of what's happening and how anti-Blackness is showing up for refugees. How have you, and this is for any of you, but I'll start with Luz. How have you noticed or observed anti-Blackness or xenophobia impact Black survivors? And then what types of microaggressions or even overt acts are survivors experiencing?
Sure. And so I'll start with my own story. I am Puerto Rican on both sides of my parents. My dad is what you would consider a Black Puerto Rican man, and my mom is what is considered a white Puerto Rican. Hence, here I am, right? I am the youngest and the only girl of 4 children, and the only one that looks like this ambiguous, like I think she's Guyanese or she's South Asian or she's, you know, everything, but I'm Puerto Rican, like what the hell, right? like for real, right? And so, and not only am I Puerto Rican, I'm like this New Yorkican, Black, like arrogant New Yorkicanness, like there's like we have a culture all of ourselves, but even within my own family, Blackness was hatred. Like there was not a day that I didn't hear my mom say things, because of course I'm also reminding her of my father who left her when I was a year old. And there was not a day in my household where, whether it was English or Spanish, but mostly in Spanish, that there wasn't a saying, you know, and I often think about like doing a training just on our sayings in Spanish. And I went to Portuguese and used this analysis, this saying around, you don't marry Black women. Las mujeres negras no se casan. And it's an actual adage in the same way, like it takes a village to raise a child or whatever these American adages are, right? And it is an actual belief. And I went to Brazil and I shared it. And in Brazil, they have the same one, except it goes even further, and it literally based on race and our color and our phenotype, and how the more African, more Black you look, then that is definitely the woman that you rape. Like literally our cultures have bought into this. And so I hope I'm answering your question. But in my own family, and that is why I think it took me 26 years to say what happened to me. I was 26 years old when I share with my family what actually happened to me. And I shared it in pieces because it's 7 years by different people in my family and by different people in our community, like at different times, right? So like, so for me, it wasn't, I didn't want to tell because of the criminal justice. I didn't want to tell because I didn't even think I didn't even understand that something bad happened to me because I was so young, and it was such a part of my conditioning in my own home. And so we have to reckon as Black people, especially those of us who are Black diasporic people from the Caribbean and from Latin America, have to reckon with the reality of anti-Blackness and colorism in our own communities and in our own families. And we have to demystify and speak up and say, no, this shit ain't funny. Like literally you are told, marry white, so you marry right. Right? So you could limpiar la raza, so you could clean your race. Like these are things that when you hear and you grow up in this way, you believe them. Right? And so not only was it in my own household, it is believed in my community in this way. You know, I think of like Maria hit Puerto Rico, but Maria also hit the Virgin Islands, and the world didn't come out for the Virgin Islands. And so I found it as my role, right? as my privileged role as someone who's born and raised in the US to say, no, we need to raise money for the Virgin Islands too, because those are Black folks who also got hit, but we never have those conversations. And as a matter of fact, I think CARICOM, Puerto Rico don't even join because they don't want to be associated with the Caribbean. They want to be associated with Latin America, which we think is white and is not. Literally, Black folks, not only in the US are being killed, but Colombia, pick a country, Venezuela, right? Haiti, along the border. If the Dominican Republic continues to build walls, just like Trump wanted to, along the border to keep what? To keep Black Haitians out. Like, we have to really reckon and have these conversations. And don't get me wrong, yes, we have to do anti-racism and all that, but we have to reckon with ourselves, especially those of us who come from Latin America and the Caribbean, with what does it mean to continue to use respectability politics, which I think is the death of our people, right? My roommate in college was an African-American sister who got pregnant when she was 18 years old, and her entire church, who she had grown up with in the Black church, they shunned her. They shunned her and kicked her to the curb. She could never come back to that church. Like, we've got to get rid of these respectability politics that has us, that maintains this sort of privileged space of, if you have money, if you're straight, if you're able-bodied, if you, it's really, and it's hard because it touches on the migrant and the immigrant experience of our families coming here, right? And the dream that we come here with, and how we want to be perfect, but then we create a distance with Black Americans because we're not as bad as them. Like, we have to have these real conversations. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I made them salient because I'm hoping that some of you who are Spanish speaking like me, I'm pissing you off so that you add this to your work, because it is very much interconnected to what allows for rape and sexual violence and incest and child sexual abuse to exist. So I hope I answered your question, but I felt like I needed to talk about it within my story and away from just the systems, because our families are also systems. And if you've not read Digging the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse, Love with Accountability by Aisha Shahida Simmons, it is an amazing book of 40 other Black diasporic survivors like myself, talking about where the real reckoning had to take place. And I think Clemma Lewis is telling us, and mad shout out to her as one of my mentors as well, is telling us that we have to reckon with our family dynamics around the things that we have been conditioned to allow. Like, that's the uncle and everybody knows, but we're not talking about that uncle. Right. And we're not, and we're also not talking about this idea of how we define beauty, right? And how it's all based on European, like everybody gotta look like Jennifer Lopez. I'm like, no, most Puerto Ricans do not look like Jennifer Lopez, and don't believe that hype, right? Most Puerto Ricans look like Arturo Schomburg, hence he gave us the Schomburg Center, the largest library of Black history. And so we have to connect these issues and not let anti-Blackness or respectabilities divide us into these little cliques where we can't even come into the room and be with each other to have critical conversations around this.
Millicent or Hibo, any thoughts around how it's impacted survivors, or how you've seen it come up in legal systems or legal settings?
I think when you're talking about microaggressions that people would have come up in like legal settings, you're talking about, it's going back to who's acceptable. So if you are too emotional, you're too animated, you're moving your hands, doing things like that, that's not the way they like you in court, right? That's not what a judge wants to see. The prosecutor's going to think you're too emotional. It's very, the way people communicate, the way we even laugh loudly and move our bodies can be very cultural, but the legal system is based on, historically very staid, very, somber. That sticks out like a sore thumb. You can even say some agencies will refuse people. They're too emotional. She's too volatile. She's too emotional, without really looking and trying to work with the person. Or maybe the advocate thinks that they know better. You need to do this. You need to do this. You need to do this. And then when the person says they don't want to do that, then are they going to get refused services, or they're just going to be handed off to someone else? And now they don't have any resources in their area because they didn't do what the advocate or anyone else told them to do. those kinds of things are definitely the microaggressions that you will see happen, unfortunately, especially in the legal system.
And I think the examples you gave of really at any point by anyone in the legal system, you sort of are at a disadvantage, because if you don't show up the way they want to, or if you show up in the way that's authentic to you and they don't like it, you know, there's an outcome for you potentially. So I think that's really important. Hibo, did you have other thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing also I will add is also like, when a victim is, for example, let's say a black woman, and then the perpetrator is maybe a white. So how, like, when seeking justice, like, it's not gonna be favorable for the black. And then the other time, sometimes, even some spaces when we black women, we're talking somewhere, are we considered too loud, too, like, confronting, too, like, aggressive, too, like, because we are trying to break those barriers. Already, like, the system has laid so many barriers for, and not only service providers, victims, and every, like, people who have a blackness. And the other thing is also, are we trying, and because even some organizations, and even though we, like, all the time we're cultural specific organization, sometimes, like, when we and ourselves, we trying to provide services, but we don't have, we rely some materials from and mainstream, and we like, no, this one doesn't serve any purposes for our black people, like, we have to change everything. We have to be like, we have to have that open-mindedness, and like create and something that's specific, because every victim is unique, and every victim needs are different than the other victims. For our people, it's completely different how they want it, how they see justice for them, for themselves, how, what are the things that they want. It's not just like, one piece together everything. So services are different, and people, like, sometimes even we will see, like, of people from our community, they don't, like, trying to embrace the other, like, changing their colors, changing their, like, we're not comfortable in our own skin, so that's are some of the things that we see.
Thank you. Can you talk about a little bit more about some of the unique challenges that might exist for younger generations experiencing sexual violence that maybe didn't exist 10 or 20 years ago, or vice versa? I'm thinking, and before you answer, I know I like cut you off, but I'm thinking specifically about people's tension around technology, and what happens there. A lot of folks automatically tend to blame technology, as if technology is the root of revenge porn, or the root of a lot of different things that we might see. But whatever comes up for you, sort of thinking about differences with generations. Millicent or Hibo, would you want to start?
I can start. My first thought is, thank God that I'm not young now, that I got to live my youth and college years anonymously and not on someone's TikTok or Instagram feed. I think one thing is the law has not caught up to technology. So the fact that people can videotape everything and you get these snippets, the law is behind all that. And, on TV, they act like you can show a video and somebody's convicted and it's all done in an hour because that's a TV show. That's not real life. Real life, the law is behind where technology is. So unfortunately, young people today are living in a situation where some of their victimization is being captured. Maybe they are the victim of something and someone else is videotaping. And because of the way young people do things, it gets put on TikTok quickly. Older people would be Facebook Live, but everybody else is Instagram and TikTok, and things happen really quickly, which the video might not show the whole story. So if the video gets out and it shows you being victimized and it looks like a porn still, but it actually is a sexual assault happening to you, then what comes out and what a survivor would have to live in is everybody going, oh, we saw you Friday night, saw a video of you at the party Friday night. And that's very traumatizing for people because they have a different recollection. It wasn't a party for them. It wasn't fun. And also the legal system then doesn't know, is a snippet real? Is it been edited? So there's going to be less valuation of it. But there's this whole social judgment that survivors have to deal with, because before this technology existed, unless somebody was doing like home porn with cameras and things like that, you wouldn't see these things. And now it's as simple as, picking up your iPhone and you can capture mini movies. And I mean, there is value to video. I'm not saying there's not value, because obviously videotapes have also helped people, especially people of color, when they're being attacked and things like that, and to prove their innocence. So there is value, but it is a very dangerous time. And I think for young people, it also impacts them psychologically, that the dissemination of negative images of you, the dissemination of your victimization, especially if you don't choose to report, if everyone in your high school knows, if everyone in your small town knows, if everybody has seen, that is a huge amount of interest, activity, judgment, shame being put upon you. And we don't really have resources that we provide to people who, even a revenge porn site could be hard to get down, let alone somebody posted a TikTok of a sexual assault of you. And it might just be somebody who captures it and they just put it up there, and they don't care who you are. They don't care who the perpetrator is. They just care that they got a moment, because it seems like a lot of people just capture these images and don't even call, to try and help you. They just want to capture something, in going viral seems to be the big thing, without looking at, these are actually people. This interaction is actually harm happening to someone. And I don't know. I mean, technology, there are pluses. Like, I do like my iPhone, but there are huge minuses when we're talking about sexual assault, and the law will be years behind catching up to a lot of this stuff, because it takes a while for them to enact laws where you could even use videos for everything, and record and things like that. And if you live in a place where recording takes consent of two parties, it's not like somebody who's sexually assaulting you is going to consent to the recording, because that would never happen. So I just think that there are a lot of issues to me around social media and video, unfortunately.
Yeah. Other thoughts, Hibo or Luce?
I will say, yeah, that it has become an issue, like, and sex texting and pornography and those things, like, technology, it has its and pros and cons both. And people have taken it to the notch. Some of them, like, have recorded some things and are using against the victims that like, so you have. And one time I saw this clip from one of the lady from the community, where somebody just recorded, and that was her husband, or I don't know, like, somebody that she was, and they were using that against her. And all the time they were like, come to those places before we publicize this. And then she was getting tired of it, and she was like, go ahead and do it. So when they do it, she was like, they're gonna do it, it's gonna run for a while, but they're gonna forget it. But that also, like, she was brave enough to come up and say, like, go ahead, do it. But there's a lot of victims who don't have that courage, or say, like, don't publicize it, I'm gonna consent to whatever you want. And that is like, those victims that are already on that, like, manipulated throughout, and most of the time.
Luce?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, we have to go into our families and into our communities and have real big conversations around incest, around child sexual abuse, in ways that we have not yet begun to do so. I'm going to uplift to one of my survivor beloveds, Ignacio Rivera, gender fluid, queer, best prevention educator I know, based in Baltimore. You want to check them out. I'll put their link in the chat. It's called Heal to End Project. And Ignacio says to us, we teach our kids how to drive, we teach our kids how to cook, but we don't take the time to teach our kids about respecting their bodies and other people's bodies, so much so that something like technology is used in a way to harm our bodies, right? So like everything that Millicent and Hibo said. And then I also want to stress that schools themselves don't even know what to do when these cases happen. Like they are completely at a loss. They don't even know where to begin to even end or what to do, and neither do rape crisis centers. And so it's a conversation where if those of you who are on this call and can hear me and like all this techie stuff that is above my head and want to get down and do, I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. But I also think it starts at home and in our community. We spend a lot of time talking about racism, and rightfully we should, but we don't spend enough time talking about how sexism and misogyny has infiltrated our communities to think that that's part of our culture in some way. And so just want to leave that there.
So I do want to go ahead and open it up for some questions or comments from the group. If folks want to maybe raise their hand so we can see one person at a time, but raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. I know the chat's been, live, but if folks wanted to ask the panelists some questions, we can do that now. I also have some additional questions I can just keep asking, but I'm trying to give space to the group. So folks, questions for the group? Let's see. Or comments or stories to share. Go ahead, Kara.
Okay, I'll get my video going. First of all, I want to thank all of you beautiful ladies. Y'all are awesome, and I really appreciate you being on here today and sharing your stories and other things. My question for all of you is, when I'm working with a victim whose culture, family, and community tell her that part of her being is to be victimized sexually, how do I reach out and support her when her own family, her own mother is participating in that? Well, we're all just raped at 14, and that's kind of what happens in our community. So how can I reach out to a victim like that?
All right, there it goes. You want to go, Hibo?
Yes, I can go. And, the first thing is like, and we have seen cases like that, and it's not like, and from experience wise, and what we used to do is like, we used to allow that and victim to at least join a peer-to-peer group, which Nisaa has, and to be like so, because sometimes when those services, and it's so hard sometimes, like talking to that mother and say, hey, this is not acceptable, this is, but again, the approach you're going to use is like, you have to identify that mother, which, because we always, this is the strategy we use at Nisaa, is like, we try to find, if we're going to talk issues about sexual assault, we need to find that community, somebody from that community who's going to go in and talk. Because when we came, my community perceive a sexual assault in a different way from another African community. So we need to understand the traditional, the traditional, the norms, everything. So the approaches will be like, who is somebody that this mother can, like, somebody that this mother will be receptive, taking her advices and listening to her. The other thing is like, the service is a priority to the victims, but the victims, even if we provide services to the victims, if the house and the mother is not somebody who see this as an issue, then like, this, it will not, like, we have to treat the wound from the bottom to go, like, so it's good to have a conversation with the mother and send somebody who, like, she can relate to, who can give her, and that's what we always do, like, this support group where she will need to understand and have her, like, what her fears are, what are the things that preventing her from getting justice for her daughter, how can she support of her daughter? Maybe have that one-on-one conversation and with somebody who looks like her to pass that information to her. And then also another services for the victim. So that's how approaches that we use at our organization. I don't know whether that's helpful, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it was really helpful. And I'm sorry, Yana, I'm gonna jump in here. And I'm just gonna say that in the same way we have to liberate this country from this long love with patriarchy and white supremacy, we have to liberate this movement. And so clearly what that is saying to us, that scenario that the person asked the question about, is saying to us that all the funding that we get from the Violence Against Women Act and philanthropists and foundations, we still are not it's still not seeping into supporting Black and Brown communities across the US and in the US territory, in US occupied territories around what this work looks like. And so rather than see this as a dag, that's so sad, the whole family has no problem. I actually want to say and challenge you to think that if you took the time to talk to that family, that you will probably see that there's other survivors in that family, and that perhaps there's more work that needs to be done. But more important than that, sink some of your funding into that community to do a listening session with that community, so that community, because I guarantee you everybody in that community is not thinking the same way that family might be thinking, the same way my family thought as well, right? But there are people in that community that are probably the ones that our people go to for help with immigration status, for help with an advocacy around school, for help and advocacy around the police and all these systems, and are also wanting to tap into this issue of sexual violence, but they don't have the resources and they're not linked up with the people who have the resources. So if we continue to just think that this work can only be done by rape crisis centers, then we silence the very communities that are the ones that are gonna wrap themselves around our young people and our survivors to be able to do this work in the same way Hibo and her and their comrades across this country. So use it as a way to have a conversation with your organization that says, when's the last time that we really focused in this community, and how could we bring some leaders from that community into our offices and begin to talk about how do we unpack this reality, not from a deficit place, but from a place that you can uplift and do some really critical work around that. And knowing that maybe your agency can only go but so far, but you can release some of those fundings. And if they don't have a 501c3, you could be a pass-through for them and you can provide some funding for it.
Thank you. And thank you for your question, Kara. I see a hand from, I think it's Clemma.
Yeah, I want to say good afternoon and a special hello to Luz and Greta. I'm Clemma Lewis. I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Coalition in St. Croix. I've been doing this work in the Virgin Islands for 40 years. And it's with victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. I applaud the panelists, you were excellent, but I'm at the stage with Luz now. We really got to work on our community. I'm getting ready to do a big workshop next month on sibling incest in our community because it's not getting any better. We're still trying to shut it up. We got 2 senators we calling out now for sexually harassing their staff. I mean, for some of you all, this might seem like something that happened in the past, but we still living it. My community is 90% people of color. So I don't have the racism issues you have, but I have the internalized racism and prejudice because we don't get what we do to each other. We don't get the colorisms. We don't get the name calling. We don't get calling down each island because that's what we do, calling people Santo and Garrett, instead of appreciating and support each other. I hope those of y'all in this, doing this work, realize when you're dealing with people from the Caribbean, it is different because we come from a different perspective. But I just want to piggyback with Luz that is so important for us to spend more time. And I give our money loose, and I use my money in this community, in this predominantly Black community and Boca. And it's all about our people and trying to set them free and running groups. And we got a lot of violence going on. So now I have to reach out to homicide survivors. It get deeper and deeper by the minute, but we have to be willing to do the work. You can't be afraid. You have to be willing to be ostracized by your community, call names, say you're a troublemaker. I think every name in the book, I've heard it. But what's important is that we got to make a difference, and we can use the language, but it's time we go in our communities and make a difference, because I'm tired of seeing generations of women still being hurt. 30 and 40 years old telling me about what happened to them when they were 8 because nobody helped them. So I want to appeal to the group. We got to go inside our own communities and find a way to make a difference. And guess what? They're open. Well, if you heard this myth about we don't listen and we don't want help, that's not true. I have never reached a community here wasn't open to hear what I had to say, wanted to support, and was looking for help. We just got to have that open heart, that spirit, and be willing to do what we need to do to get us through it. So please reach out. Let's look at let's have another focus on trying to help our community and clean out all this incest, domestic violence, sexual abuse, trafficking, the whole 9 yards. It's all in our backyard. So I say thank you, women, and the panelist was excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Clemma. That was a whole word. Please make sure to drop your contact information in the chat, and I'll be definitely reaching out to you for a workshop soon. So I'm excited. Stephanie, did you have a question or comment?
Well, it's more like a comment, and I just want to appreciate you guys having this. I am very passionate about these particular issues that we are advocating right now during this month of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I am here in Atlanta, Georgia. I am a dancer actively in the hip hop culture. And one of the things that I like to combat, especially in the hip hop culture, is these particular issues, which is issues, especially with us dancers in our community and stuff. So I'm like, me and other dancers in different cities and states are really combating on these particular issues and been following each other and stuff like that. And so to join in and listening to what you guys are speaking on, it resonates so much. And what the things we deal with, you know, especially the women, and I know the men also are affected too, but they're so quiet because, you know, in the entertainment industry, it can be a little tricky. And then, you know, people can get affected if they want to come forward to saying stuff and speaking out. So it kind of affects their career and stuff. But I'm right now I'm a part of an organization called National Organization for Women, and I am a committee member of the Violence Against Women committee, and just wanted to just give you guys, you know, salutes. I love y'all's platform. Love what you guys do, and we're actually having an event at the end of this month next weekend. It's called Jam for Sam, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and I'm hoping to invite dancers out so we can bring awareness within our culture and within our community. There are other dancers in other cities and states that are having them. I had a B-girl out in New Mexico who had an event that focused not only on sexual assault but other issues that was bringing awareness. And then there's dancers in Chicago, and they're focusing on healing. Mostly healing is the main focus on a lot of these events. So at this event, we just wanted to focus on dance as a healing aspect and getting resources out to the dancers and anybody within the community. So
oh my God, I love everything that she just said, and I'm gonna follow them and see. I grew up in the hip hop era in Harlem, and I remember the days of Gestapos. I don't know what y'all remember, but the days of Gestapos, and given what happened to me for 7 years between the ages of 7 and 15, I was in and out of like petty crime and drug addiction. And so I was heavy into the streets. And so this is the time of the African Bambaataa and Zulu Nation and East, you know, on the East Coast, right? And graffiti and all of that. And I think it was like maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the male dancers did come out and actually came to the Albany Capitol to talk about child sexual abuse within the music hip hop industry, and called out African Bambaataa. But but I think there's a lot more work. So kudos to you for doing it. If you're in Chicago, hopefully you've connected to A Long Walk Home, Salamisha, Tillett. Look them up. They do amazing work with young people. And Atlanta Sister Song, my comrades at Sister Song do it's a Black organization that does reproductive health, and they also connect and do a lot of work with DC Rape Crisis around sexual assault. So just want to shout them out for you to connect to.
Thank you. If it's possible, could I get any of their contacts or anything like that? Could you send that to me?
I'll try to put it in the link because I think everybody should know, because these are all, I don't think they call themselves culturally specific because they sort of run they're sort of outside of the mainstream violence against women world, but they do amazing, amazing work. And so I'll just throw them in the chat.
Okay,
and
thank
Stephanie,
you.
feel free to add your details to the chat as well, so people can learn more about what you're doing, because that's really amazing work. Danielle.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for the panel. This has been like really, really beautiful, and so happy that this space was created for Black women survivors, just Black survivors in general. And so I am a community educator with Connect NYC. We work on intimate partner violence in New York, and in particular, I work with the faith communities. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on, I guess, twofold. One, what are some strategies for communal healing spaces for survivors? And then a second piece to that, if you don't mind just speaking on the role of the faith communities in that as well.
I'm so sorry, but I feel like I want to take this on because I don't want to leave the space without giving a shout out to the work that we do on July 25th, because it is a communal space. July 25th is known as the International Day of la Mujer Negra internationally. It's mostly celebrated in the Caribbean and throughout Latin America. It was founded by 4 Dominican sisters in the Dominican Republic who were fed up with racism and sexism. And so we've used it since 2016 as a way to approach communal healing. I'm gonna also share the link, or I'll send it to Yana, around the research that I co-authored based on 50 listening sessions with 50 adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, all who are part of the Black diaspora. Hibo actually took part in it, and some of her staff, when I drove out to Iowa from the East Coast, which was, that's a call in and of itself. But anyway, one of the things that came out from these listening sessions was the need for communal healing, like to heal in community. So yes, for many of us, and for me, myself, I've done it for 20 years, done the one-on-one Western way of healing, but also what is communal healing, and then really rooting it down into African traditions and what that looks like. And for many of you who are like, well, what is she talking about? I'm talking about Santeria, Ifa, Yoruba, all of the ways, candomblé, all of the ways that we as African people, right, have utilized the earth and natural resources in order to maintain our lives, even through the worst of times. And so we use July 25th, not only as a day to celebrate ourselves as Black Latinas and Black Caribbean women, but also to honor those of us who are survivors, to speak our truth, to build solidarity with each other. And we do it in DC, in collaboration with the DC Rape Crisis Center, with the Afro-Latino Caucus of DC, and sometimes, depending on the mayor's office, maybe them, but it's really a space for us as communities, Black queer folks, Black people with disabilities. Before Ntozake Shange, who's the author of For Color Girls Only, passed away, she would make this like her annual event and come to it. And she would say to me all the time, because she too was a survivor of child sexual abuse and incest, but never really she used her art and her writing as a way to tell our stories. And she was like, Luce, and we talk in Portuguese, Spanish, and we talk 4 different languages, including ASL, because we understand how colonization works to separate us. And so I just want to mass shout out for that. It's what Black Women's Blueprint did in 2016 when they did the Truth and Reconciliation, and they had us, I think it was in the old Harlem church, sharing our truth. right? And so we're often taught, like, when you have a conference, you have one room and that's the safety room. This entire space becomes the safety room, because we know that as Black people, we have been inundated since the founding of this country on trauma. And so all of us have to treat each other with some mad, deep love and respect and grace, even when we're saying shit that don't make no goddamn sense, right? And so, so we don't just have one room. We have the entire room. We have altars in every room. We have healers that is their only job, is to be around. And I'm not talking about 3 people or 2 people. I'm talking about 10 people that are walking and around this space, so that if people are crying, we're not trying to stop them from crying. We're trying to witness them and stand with them in solidarity. Because for many of us, we're not allowed, as Black women, we are not ever allowed to just be and break down. We have to be perfect. I'm telling you, respectabilities is going to kill us. And so this space is not even part of, you have to like couch your pain until you could get to it. No, you don't have to couch shit. We have to release, and we have to support each other, right? In a non-judgment way around what that ends up looking at, whether it's full on rage or tears or laughter, whatever it looks like for our people. We have to think about setting those up outside of this traditional way that we've been taught by this movement that only doesn't even work for them as white people. And so hopefully that has helped you. A great group, if you're in New York, and I'm assuming that you probably work with Quentin Walcott, because I believe he works at Prevent Connect New York. And I know that he's, okay, so ask Quentin to get you connected to Harriet's Apothecary, because Uta is an African sister, is amazing. And this is literally what they live for. And they're all healers. They're social work, academic healers, and they're also spiritual healers.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? So I have a question. We've been talking through it already, but what are some other strategies or thoughts around, whether it's a mainstream or a culturally specific program, but what are your thoughts around getting folks active and getting folks invested in ensuring that their services are culturally relevant, are culturally humble?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. What are some strategies or thoughts that you would share around helping service providers ensure that their services are culturally relevant, or at least culturally humble, or their approaches are culturally humble?
I think doing research and with the community that you're working with, and that is one thing that, you know, when we were building, we're establishing this, the first thing we did was an assessment where we wanted to know and go to the leaders, like community leaders, and see. And we've seen, like, you know, how far these people, like, you know, some will talk about it and some will not talk about it. And so it's just good to know the background of the community that you're dealing with, their norms, their tradition. For us, like, you know, one thing that we always, and we have been talking a lot about, is like female genital cutting, which is something that is traditionally practiced and is something that has, like, you know, embedded in the community. It's been passed on from generation to generation. But that's a part of also sexual assault that people, like, you know, are not like that much aware of. And so it's good, like, you know, and breaking those barriers and providing those services will not be and well received if you don't know the cultural values of these and practices. So it's like, you know, it's good and to know the community that you're dealing with, what are and what are their norms, what are their and how to approach, formulate plans of how you're going to approach them. And cultural specific organization, that's why we say, like, our services are unique. And because we try to dig and think outside the box, and try to make services available. For example, if we when we were doing the female genital career education, we would say like a female of these victims will take much longer time in even going through the reporting, assessment, like saying nurses. Those are things that you need to understand and be prepared for. And a lot of times, things, a lot of service providers are not prepared for receiving, even at the hospital, receiving this kind of population. And they had because this has been done to them when at a young age. It's a sexual assault. It's is that something that's talked about a lot? No. So it's good to dig around, know the historical and the background and the community you're dealing with, and the services can be tailored to the needs of the victim. And that.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I think both of my co-presenters kind of touched on it, that in order to really be an informed ally, you actually do have to see who your community is before the first person comes in the door. Because now you're just reacting to the person there, but you don't have any relationship with the community. You don't know anything about their culture. So it's hard to provide appropriate services when you haven't looked to see who you're supposed to be serving. You have to see who's in the community, and then have some diversity on your staff too. It's not just being an ally, it's actually having people who provide services that look like the community. And I think Lou's brought up the point about it might be working with organizations who are actually supporting and uplifting Black women. It might not be your organization that actually is the appropriate one. I think Hibo also said the same thing with religious organizations, but that trickles down through all of the services. In order to know what type of services are going to be culturally appropriate, you do have to look and see what community you're working in, and what people are accessing your services. And it might be that all you're going to be doing is providing a warm handoff to someone else to actually provide the services, somebody who is more appropriate than your organization. But that also means that money needs to be provided sometimes too, because all work can't be for free. But I do think it's important to look and see who's actually working with the communities and having those relationships, creating those relationships with other service providers, with the people who really know what is going on, because you're going to need assistance.
Look, I think it's 2022. And if you are still trying to figure out cultural competency or cultural relevance or whatever the heck, then you are archaic and you are part of the racism and white supremacy problem. Like, no, I mean, if you really are in the business of helping survivors, then you must know that you can't possibly help all survivors. And so make space in your local communities for what you think are not leaders, and we know in the hood are the real leaders of that community, right? Use your allyship. If and I don't know, I'm looking at pictures and I don't see too many, but I think so. I want to speak to us as Black women, but if you are in here and you're a white ally, use your allyship and your privilege of receiving violence against women dollars or OVS dollars or Phipps dollars to release some of those fundings and be a pass-through the same way your state coalition is a pass-through to you. You could do that. You could easily do that. And do not co-opt the way that they're choosing to organize. Listen to what Hibo's saying. Hibo is right. The community may not use your same language. They may not even use your same approach, but they should not, because if they do, then we will continue to hear stories of girls who are like me, who were sexually abused, and my family don't know what to do and don't even want to talk about it till this day, you all. Like, so I'm not sharing something with you that I myself has not experienced till this day. Till this day, I am still reckoning with how do we talk about the bystanders in my family, my brothers, my mothers, my cousins, my aunts, who just stood there and were okay with me being silent until I was 26 years old. Like, come on, there's some shit, we got to figure that out. And then to us as a people, Look, we know that before Christianity landed and made itself a colonizer of our people, that many of us were Muslim, many of us were practicing African traditions, and look to those ways of uplifting some healing around what that looks like. And if you don't know, then read, look at the work of Octavia Butler, who's like talking about Afrofuturism and using like the earth and the stars and whales to literally think about how we as a people who are sun people, who are people of this earth, used it to care for ourselves. Unleash and decolonize your relationship with these white notions of what it means to heal and what it looks like in a serious way, you all. Look to Africa for what are the Black leaders in our motherland doing in an effort to push and stand up against misogyny and patriarchy in our own communities. And I think that is how we will find ways. And that's how also we will build solidarity. Look to see what Clem is doing in the Virgin Islands and has been doing for the last 40 years. Like that is where we will get these answers. And that is how we'll know that we are doing culturally specific work. Because our community will tell us, I don't know what you're doing, Luz. You're nuts. That shit ain't coming. Like they'll tell us, you know, like please, like I don't think us asking, people are going to be on death silence. People are dying to be asked in the same way that when I was 12, I wanted my teachers to ask me, why was I so angry? Why was I cut in class? What was that about? But nobody asked me because Black girls and Black femmes and Black children are seen as disposable. And we must see our lives with the obligation that we need to make a difference.
Thank you. I just want to give space for maybe one or two more questions or comments before we wrap up. Any last thoughts? This is the time. This is the space. I was trying to see if anything came through in the chat. Okay, so if anyone does have any final comments, questions, feedback, or want to reach out, please, presenters, please share your contact information in the chat. Our Ujima team will also share our TTA contact information for folks who want to reach out and connect. We have a lot more workshops, conferences, Ujima talks, coffee and convos, cookouts coming up for Black advocates in this space who are interested. We have recently started a space that's been intentionally designed for Black advocates in the field, and it's called The Cookout. You're all invited. Please look out for more information. We're hosting sort of monthly modality based, so yoga, healing circles, meditation, or conversation based spaces. So look out for those. And we also have our regular coffee and convo series that we do. That's an open space to everyone, just informal, relaxed. Bring your tea, bring your coffee or a cocktail, whatever you want, and just have conversation for that afternoon. And then of course, our regular webinars as well that we host throughout the year. So please check out our website. Our information will be coming out more and more. Our wonderful presenters, thank you all so, so much. Again, contact information, please share it in the chat. And I think let's go ahead and end off on final thoughts or final thoughts for the group. Last words for survivors or advocates doing this work. Let's start with you, Millicent. Last thoughts. Oh, wait, you're muted.
I didn't realize I was muted. The thing that you said are final thoughts for advocates. And I guess my final thought for advocates would be take care of yourself. This is not easy work. This is really hard work and it's not going to end anytime soon. So you need to practice self-care. You need to realize that assisting people and trying to change systems it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you want to make sure that you maintain your own personal health as you do this work, because you're all doing really, really good work, but it's hard work. This is hard.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Millicent. Hibo?
I will say, I will also echo what Millie said, and yeah, this work and will never end, and it's good to take care of yourself, to for you to be competent, like to be mindful, like to be well enough to take care of somebody else. We carry people's burden, we carry people's traumas, and also like we are also human beings, that we also have our own lives. So and it's also bring courage to be in this and your shoes, and but our survivors need us, and we always put their lives before ours. So be ground yourself, take care of yourself. Self-care is important. Take your mental health days if your organization offers, and yeah, be at least mindful of yourself and your family and your survivors too.
Thank you. And I saw a comment come through. We will be sharing the recording. Yes, we will publish it when it's cleaned up a little bit tech-wise, because then we had that pause in the beginning. So yes, we'll be sharing it, as well as other information will be coming out on our website and social media. And then Luce, I'm going to go ahead and give you the final word. But again, this has been an amazing conversation, and we really appreciate everyone and what you all have brought to this space. Go ahead and take it away, Luce.
Wow. Normally I start events and we pour libation, because we know as Black people that when we say the names of those who have gone, they never die. They live through us and through our children. And so I offer you all who are listening to me love and grace and deep, deep compassion for self always first. And remembering your ancestors, whether it's your auntie or your mom or a child you may have lost, or Ntozake Shange's and Harriet Tubman's, right? And Nina Simone, and all of these amazing people who have given us joy and art and music and poetry and have really raised this country. May their work and their words and their art also lift you up, so that we can keep lifting each other up. So peace and love, people.
And on that note, thank you all again. Thank you, panelists, participants, for being in this space together and for really being open and honest and sharing and loving towards each other. That's always important in this work. We have 7 minutes of intentional self-care that I'm going to send you off to do on your own. Please do it. Make sure you're breathing, get your water, get your lunch, whatever you need. Take that 7 minutes to do nothing if that's what you need. But again, thank you all. Looking forward to being in space with you in the future and in coming events. But take care of yourselves, be well, and be safe.